Hello everyone and welcome to another video. Now today we're taking a look at a graphics card that can be found very cheaply on sites like eBay. In fact, you can find it for about 20 to 30 pounds here in the UK, and for that price I don't think it's too bad, but I'll let you make your own minds up. Now I thought I was done with older GPUs like this, but I just had to check this out because it came as part of an HP workstation pre-built that I'm turning into a bit of a gaming PC, and this graphics card just won't cut it for more modern and intensive titles, so I thought I'd give it one last chance to show us what it's got. Now this is the K2200. It launched in 2014. Think of it somewhat as a professional version of the GTX 750 Ti, that old legend. It's got very similar specs, same amount of cores, the only difference is that it has 4 gigs of VRAM, and you can get 4 gig 750 Ti's, but they are a lot more expensive. They're about 60-70 pounds still, so this definitely sounds like the better option on paper, and what's more, it works with the latest game ready drivers. I'm using version 560.94, so that's a bonus too. But let's get into the games. We'll start off with a few negative points. So the first 2 attempts at gaming were a bit of a disaster. Elden Ring would not launch regardless of whether or not we performed a clean driver installation or used the gaming/workstation drivers, because we can use either one of course, but it did not want to launch no matter what I did. The same thing could be said with Starfield. This just told me that I didn't meet the minimum requirements. It wouldn't even let me attempt to play the game, which was a bit of a shame, but totally understandable given that this launched in like mid 2014, so we're talking 10 years ago now. So let's move on to the more positive gameplay results, games that actually ran on this card. We'll start off with Apex Legends 1080p with 60 FPS adaptive resolution. So we're basically targeting 60 FPS here, and the game will dynamically adjust things in order to try and hit that. It worked quite well, even with the high textures, everything else set to lowest, and TSAA. We actually saw 61 FPS on average, so I'm wondering what would have happened if I set the target higher, but this was just fine for this card. 61 overall, a 1% low of 52 and a 0.1% low of 47. Not a bad start for something that can be found for 20-30 quid. Next up we have Baldur's Gate 3 1080p. I will mention whether I used FSR 2.2 or FSR 1 or FSR 3 depending on the game. If a game offers different options of course. If the game just offers one version of FSR, say it's 2.1 or 1, I'll just put FSR in the title. Here I had to differentiate because you can use 2.2 or 1.0 at the moment in Baldur's Gate 3. I use 2.2, it looks a bit better. Ultra performance mode still looks okay I guess if you're desperate. The lowest settings for 40 FPS here. The 1% low was 33 and the 0.1% number was 26. So Cyberpunk 2077 didn't quite fare as well, but we still saw over 30 frames per second, 36 on average with a 1% low of 27 and a 0.1% low of 20. This is with FSR set to ultra performance with the in-game settings at their respective lowest. It still looks okay to play. It's going to make your eyeballs hurt after a while because it's a little bit blurry. Looks as though someone has smeared a tub of Vaseline across the monitor, but I mean it is playable, so we can at least be thankful for that, I guess. I then tried the latest Call of Duty, Black Ops 6, the open beta, which ends the same night I'm playing this. By the time this video is uploaded, the beta will now be non-accessible. The next chance you're going to have to play this is probably at full release next month, I believe it is. Yeah, so here, 40% res scale. This was a better option than choosing FSR because that actually slowed things down a bit, at least in the beta version. So 40% res scale of 1080p. Lowest settings here for 47 frames per second. 25 was that 1% low and the 0.1% low was 22. I do think it's still somewhat playable like this. I mean, as you can see here, I'm not doing too bad. I seem to be okay at Call of Duty games. Someone actually pointed it out in the comments the other day. CS2 I'm absolutely useless at, we'll move on to that momentarily, but when it comes to Call of Duty, I seem to be alright, especially in this latest game. Seems a bit easier to me for whatever reason, I don't know, but performance wise, pretty difficult to look at, makes your eyeballs burn a bit, but performance wise it's okay considering the specs and the price of the card. We shall move on to the aforementioned CS2 now. As you can see, I'm getting absolutely destroyed as expected and as always basically. but we did see a pretty respectable frame rate overall here, as you can see. The percentile lows were pretty consistent as well, so it really wasn't all that bad for CS2 at the lowest settings. I always say that you only really need the lowest settings for Counter-Strike 2, especially as a competitive online game like this. Fairly playable, in my opinion, and we even saw close to and perhaps exceeded 100 FPS at times as well. We could perhaps benefit from a lower resolution, but I like to try and keep to 1080p where possible. I think that should be a minimum sort of target these days, with or without FSR, but there we go. Forza Horizon 5 struggled a bit more than I thought it would with anything higher than the very low preset. I think I may have overdone it with the FSR preset. I think we could have perhaps chose quality as opposed to balanced, because getting 60 FPS was pretty much impossible on average unless we use the most aggressive form of FSR. So I think if you want to target at least 30 plus FPS, we could have stuck with low, perhaps at native resolution. Very low with FSR balance. Still looks okay for 52 overall, but I think trying to hit 60 is a bit of a waste of time. You're not going to do it unless you make the game look like a bit of a blurry mess. I don't think I needed to turn things down as far as I did here, because I would have been happy with 30 FPS on the K2200. I'd like to just point out that the power consumption as well is sitting at around 20 to 30 watts, so a very low power card. If you are concerned with that sort of thing, then you'll be pleased to know this card does not consume much power. Fortnite up next, 1080p, the low preset. Didn't quite feel the need to use the performance mode here. I just stuck with the standard low preset, 100% 3D res, and FXAA for an average of 74 FPS. Definitely playable in my opinion. The 1% low was 51 and the 0.1% figure was 7.8 or 8 as I like to round things up. I'm not too terrible at Fortnite either, in my personal opinion. Of course, some may beg to differ, but I tend to enjoy playing this one, and I seem to be a lot better at it than I am at CS2. It just seems to be CS2 and Apex Legends that I'm not very good at, although I had a particularly good day in Apex today, I think. GTA 5 No Problems, of course, came out around the same time as the card, so high textures, everything else set to normal. Everything set to high, we'll be pushing it a bit. I started off like that, but we were seeing frequent drops below 60 FPS, couldn't quite average it, so I think high textures with everything else set to normal, soft shadows and FXAA is the perfect place to be for an average of 79 frames per second, a 1% low of 59 and a 0.1% low of 55. Very smooth and very consistent as expected from a game of this age. Red Dead Redemption 2 to finalise. FSR is pretty useless in this game in my opinion, especially with older cards. Even with it set to performance, we saw 26 FPS. With FSR off completely, we still saw at least 20. It was like 22, 23, so not quite sure what the purpose of FSR is here. It doesn't seem to do all that much. A lot of the time I test it anyway. Perhaps it's just because the card is older and I have had that problem with other games as well, where it can actually make performance worse, but yeah, I mean, it still looks okay with ultra textures, everything else set to the lowest. Doesn't perform all that well though. 26 frames per second is a bit frustrating, even as someone who's come from playing on the PS4. So yeah, probably not playable, but for 20 quid, with the majority of the results, I can't complain that much. But let me know what you think. I didn't intend to review another card this old in 2024, but it came as part of my HP system, so before selling it on, I thought I'd give it a go. Worth a punt, I think, if you play esports titles, CS2, Apex Legends, Fortnite. You want something cheap and cheerful, something that uses very little power, and something that still runs with the latest game-ready drivers at the time of this video. Leave all your thoughts and opinions down below in the comments as always, and hopefully I'll see all of you next time. Thank you for watching.